You're listening to the Weekend Sport Podcast with Jason Pine from News Talk ZB.
Right, so Rugby World Cup is less than a week away. So today, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I wanted to get round a few countries who have teams that absolutely believe that they can go deep into the tournament. We're going to call this little segment the contenders for Rugby World Cup 2023. And let's start in South Africa because they absolutely are contenders to defend the Rugby World Cup title they won 4 years ago in Japan, especially given their current form. Let's bring in long-time and hugely respected South African rugby writer Mark Keohane. Mark, great to get the chance to chat to you. Is the situation now, in your eyes, that South Africa are favourites to defend the Rugby World Cup?
It is. Like a month ago, I was slamming them when they went in cold in Mount Smart. They got blitzed in the first 20 minutes. Then I asked for a statement performance in Johannesburg against Argentina. They snuck in by 1 point. I wrote a scathing column saying, come on, give us that statement performance. They went to Cardiff. They won 52-16 against a very poor Welsh team. But it was a good performance, a record-breaking performance. And then the All Blacks picked what they could, their best 15 to start. And then Rassie pulled he pulled the great one, 7-on-1, Twickenham. And then looking at that scoreboard, 35-0. After 60 minutes, and I couldn't believe it. And 7 of the 9 worst ever Springbok defeats have come against the old enemy of the All Blacks. And we've kind of been used to getting one of those from you boys since 1992. And it was like, how are New Zealand ever going to score a point and how don't we have 50? So it was really the statement performance. They went to Corsica in the last week and they go into the World Cup on a high. New Zealand, for me, going with some serious questions once again about their forward pack. We know the brilliance and the capabilities of the All Black backs, but if you look at that second row and you look at the back five more than the front five, you think, wow, can this team beat France? Can they beat an Ireland or an All Blacks? But the Springboks, 2 big statement performances just at the right time.
Mark, you've watched a lot of Springbok rugby, a heck of a lot of Springbok rugby. Where does that performance against the All Blacks at Twickenham rank in terms of the games that you have seen South Africa play?
To me, that ranks up in, if you look at the Erasmus Nienaber era, that ranks right up there with the 32-12 demolition of Eddie's England in the 2019 World Cup final. Because of the quality of that starting 15 that the All Blacks sent out. Yes, there were complications. Lomax went down. There were the cards to Scott Barrett, etc. But just the power and the precision, and then the kind of way the Boks are playing also, and it's been forced on them because of Pollard's injury. Mani Labok coming in at 10, playing like they're playing like Stormers. They're playing like a Stormers backline with a traditional Bulls pack, and that's kind of something you haven't seen from a Springbok team. So in the professional era, it's right up there, and because of, again, the quality of the opposition. This wasn't a New Zealand second string side that played in Dunedin. This was a very good All Black side that went out there and just got blitzed. And one of the overriding memories of watching that game was looking up and seeing 7 Springbok forwards, like stretching and kind of, getting their shoulders and their necks going, coming on in one go. And I wrote a column earlier this week saying, give us 8-0 at the World Cup in one game. Give us 8 forwards and no backs, and Colby can cover 9. I just think it's just, if you've got them, play them, and there's been a lot of critique that they've manipulated the laws. There's nothing to manipulate. I think if New Zealand could play 8 backs on the bench, they would. That's the quality of your backline players. But yeah, it was a great performance. And again, we speak about the traditional South Africa and New Zealand rivalry. In the professional era, it's coming in blips, and we've been on the receiving end in the Republic on so many occasions. 57-50, I was at that game in Durban. 57-0 in Albany. Just some big, ugly defeats, and 7 or 8 of those players were at Albany, 57-0, and to look up and see 35-0 was just massive. So a lot of people have said it's a meaningless game. It was a warm-up. The All Blacks were cold. They hadn't played for 4 weeks. It was a big result for South Africa and a big confidence boost ahead of the World Cup.
All right, let's look at the pool then, Mark, because most people think Pool B, South Africa and Ireland are getting out of that pool and they'll cross over with New Zealand and France in the quarterfinals. But Scotland are there as well. Scotland, I know there are some Scottish rugby people who fully believe that they can cause an upset at this Rugby World Cup. Are Scotland potentially a dangerous opponent for the Springboks?
Look, I think there's, just given the nature of Erasmus and but there's a huge amount of respect for Scotland, as there is for Ireland. Scotland's kind of one of those sides that traditionally have always troubled us. I mean, we've got a great win record against them. I think it's 28 matches played, and they've won 5. But there's been 1 or 2 blowouts, but seldom has it been a comfortable match. It's been a kind of struggling 6 to 14-point win for the Boks. 65 minutes, you don't know where it's going to go, but somehow we kind of get over the line. So I think they're expecting a tough game, and it's a great game to prepare them for the Ireland game. So rather play in a pool where you've basically got to hit the ground running, and there's another big one coming to get into the quarterfinals. So I don't think it's anyone here is taking the Scotland game as it's a given. We saw them play France home and away with 2 different squads, and they actually edged that 52-51. So there's a feeling even here that there's more respect being shown towards the Scotland game than there is the Ireland game, and that there's an ambush waiting for Ireland. We've only played them that once in the last 3-4 years, and it went down to a 3-pointer in Dublin last year. And people were saying the Boks were holding something back on that tour when they played France in Marseille. But yeah, Scotland will be tough. But I just think that the win against New Zealand was the statement performance that they needed, because when they beat Wales as they did, people said Gatland's second stringers, it's kids, it's 8 or 9 of those guys won't go to the World Cup. But when Fozzie put out like his best available starting 15 and said this is going to be a contest in front of 82,000 people at Twickenham, and it's the game we need before we go into the World Cup, I think the quality of the opposition made that Bok performance a statement performance. And they kind of go into that first match knowing they've really performed well against traditionally one of the best teams in the world, and that sets him up for a game against Romania, and then obviously the big one against Ireland. But I think what it will give them confidence is if they have to face the All Blacks in the quarterfinal, you're only as good as your last game, and the memory is a very good one for South Africa.
It certainly is, and not a good one for us. All right, let's wrap it, Mark. We know you think South Africa will be in the final. Who will you play in the Rugby World Cup final?
I've got South Africa in the final against France, and because I've been waiting for France to fall over for 3 years, and they just haven't. And they just keep on actually doing quite well. So I said Ireland in Dublin, Ireland wins. France in Paris, France wins. But I think that this Springbok team, given that if there's no red cards, there's no bunker, there's no TMO, I think they'll play France in the final, and I think they'll beat them as emphatically as they beat England in the 2019 World Cup. I went on record to say they'll win by 20 points.
All right. Supreme confidence from you, Mark. Thanks so much, mate. That's what we get you on for, though, is your confidence. Mark Keohane, rugby writer out of South Africa, so no doubt in his mind that the Springboks go in as favourites. Text here, Piney, I think it'll be South Africa and France in the final as well. This one here, sorry guys, the All Blacks being down to 14 men is an asterisk against that result. South Africa may still have won, but it had a big impact. Thanks, Mike. Okay, let's get you to England. And to the BBC's James Burridge. England have had what could best be described as a challenging rugby year. They certainly don't come in any sort of form, including a first ever loss to Fiji in their last outing. James, thanks for joining us across New Zealand. We're going to talk head and heart here. What does your head tell you about England's chances at the Rugby World Cup?
If they get to the quarter-final, judged on current and recent performances, I think English fans must surely celebrate, because there is a lot to be concerned about if you're an English rugby fan right now. I think it's tempered. What's happened in the warm-ups has really tempered any expectations. So England, we all know they've got a very straightforward pool when you consider all the other ones. So in short, if England reach the quarterfinals and haven't lost to Japan and Samoa and have got through maybe just the one defeat to Argentina, even though that will be a bitter pill to swallow and a hard defeat to take, a quarterfinal right now is probably the best they can hope for.
James, but this is England. This is England, former Rugby World Cup winners, a proud rugby nation. They always go into tournaments sort of beating their chest and thinking that they can go deep, if not win the whole thing. Has the last 6 to 8 months really dented confidence over there?
Yes. I mean, they are so far off the pace When you consider that since Steve Borthwick has taken over, and let's be fair, it is not all his fault. There's a lot of how many times in the past have I spoken to you guys about English rugby not having an identity? And that has plagued the last 4 years when it comes to where English rugby is heading. And the defence now, which if you kind of think of English rugby, what's it good at? Well, set pieces, normally strong, and the defence is pretty consistent. The defence is shot to bits right now. And Steve Borthwick has had 9 games in charge and they've conceded 30 tries. That is an appalling statistic. And England, that's not a quick fix either. So you look at how England can try and find a way to get some form and believe themselves. They've got to establish an identity. They're trying to play this kick game plan. And they're almost like the poor man South Africa, aren't they? They base it on kicking out of their own territory. Their kick chase isn't good enough. Their kicks aren't good enough. Their set piece is okay, but their defence is woeful. And you can't win with that game plan. I just wish they could just trust themselves in attack, because they've also got the worst stats when they reach their opponent's 22. They have this inability to convert when they're in the red zone. And that's why they're coming unstuck, and probably why they're going to come unstuck in France.
Well, I mean, I take all that on board, James. I really do. But if England do get through that pool, and as you say, it's relatively friendly, they should get out of that pool okay. And then they'll cross over with a couple of sides who haven't really been setting the world on fire themselves in 2023 in Wales or Australia. I guess it could be Fiji. Might it be Fiji in the quarterfinals?
Fiji are ranked higher than Australia and Wales right now. And this is something which everyone's got to get their head around, because I could easily see Georgia pulling off a shot potentially as well. And that's what does make that quarterfinal really interesting, because none of us have a clue who are going to be in one of those quarters. I think this is one of the most competitive World Cups that we've ever had, because Fiji have come to the party. They didn't actually play that well against England, but they showed that if you give them half a chance, they'll score. Wales, I mean, I'm not sure I really know where Wales stand. And Eddie Jones hasn't helped Australia win a match yet. So looking at it on paper, that pool is not an easy pool to really guess who's going to be in the top 2.
All right, well, who's going to be in the top 2 overall, I guess, is the final question for you, James. Who plays in the Rugby World Cup final in your eyes?
I'm going to stick to what I've said all along. I'm sticking with South Africa. I just don't see anyone being able to compete with them and outmuscle them. And their game plan is simple, but it is hugely, hugely effective. And you can't deny that they're unbelievably good at what they do. And they have a habit of peaking for World Cups. They've got a really tough pool. And there's a lot of talk up here that Scotland think they can get them in that opening game, which will be fascinating. Really, really interesting. If they can run them close, can scare them a bit. But I mean, that bomb squad, that bench is just truly terrifying. And if they carry on playing the way they did against the All Blacks at Twickenham, I just cannot see anyone else. I'd love to think that Ireland could do it. I just don't think France have got enough consistency and depth. I would love to think Ireland can do it, but I just think my head says South Africa.
All right, James. Great to get your thoughts as always. The BBC's James Burridge painting a fairly grim picture for England there, but he's got South Africa winning the whole thing as well. Text through here from Ian. Looks like New Zealand has a 2-week break mid-tournament. Have they extended the tournament to avoid the minor teams having 2 games in a week like previously? Yeah, I think that's what they've done, Ian. And you're right. New Zealand does have a 2-week break mid-tournament. After their second pool game against Namibia on the 16th of September, they don't play again until the 30th. So, yeah, a couple of weeks there before they play Italy. That's exactly what's happened. Stephen says, are you kidding me? The All Blacks were only playing with 7 forwards against South Africa. Your South African reporter is dreaming. Of course, South Africa were going to win with 1 more forward. Yeah, I think they were still pretty good though, weren't they? They were still pretty good. News Talk ZB, it is 12:27 as we talk the Rugby World Cup contenders. And I do use that word in a broad sense because we go into Australia now to catch up with our favourite rugby reporter, broadcaster, journalist, aficionado out of Australia, Brett McKay. Brett, good to have you on the show as we talk Rugby World Cup contenders. Let's start with your head. What are your realistic expectations for the Wallabies at the Rugby World Cup?
I've always maintained, mate, that if the quarterfinals needs to be the goal first and foremost, and then anything after that you can worry about once you actually get there. I'm not buying into this whole Australia's guaranteed a semi-final spot. I get that it's an easier side of the draw, but once anything can happen in a knockout stage, mate, as we all know, and as we've all seen from so many countries over the years. So I think as long as they can get through to the quarterfinal stage, then they can actually have a bit of a reset and have a good hard crack after that. Because to get to the quarterfinals, they're still going to have to be playing a hell of a lot more rugby, a hell of a lot better rugby than they've shown so far. So that's got to be the first priority.
All right, you look at the pool that Australia are in, and it seems, on the face of it, fairly friendly. Wales and Australia would appear to be, historically anyway, the two that would get out of that pool. But then you see Fiji there, and you look at Fiji's year, win over Tonga in the Pacific Nations Cup, and then an equally impressive win over Samoa. They beat Japan also, 35-12 in the Pacific Nations Cup, a 34-17 defeat by France, and then the win over England. So you look at Fiji, they're ranked higher than Australia now in the latest rankings. Is Fiji a potential banana skin for Australia now in pool play?
Oh, not now. I think they always were, and I certainly thought, a couple of weeks ago when Wales knocked off England, I thought, okay, they might be coming into some form here, but they actually feels like they might have stagnated a bit over the last couple of weeks subsequently. Fiji are won, what are they, is it 4 of their last 5, which is hard to argue with. They were absolutely sensational against England at Twickenham now. And, there's probably an argument that they're favourites to get through first, to get through top of the pool on current form. They just, Simon Ravalawi's got that squad and his coaching team just absolutely humming. So they're a lot more than a banana skin, Fiji. They're going to be, I'm not going to say they're a genuine contender, but they are absolutely going to go into a knockout stage. I'm quite sure about that.
Well, let's then get you across to Brett McKay, rugby fan rather than rugby journalist. Let's look at best case scenarios. Talk with your heart a bit. What is the best case scenario? I don't think you're going to win it, but for Australia at this Rugby World Cup.
I've heard it stated publicly that, and I think Phil Waugh even said it, that a semi-final is pass mark, which on one hand feels about right, but on the other hand, it also feels awfully bloody ambitious at this point, given the current form lines and everything. So, look, a semi-final would absolutely be a good tournament because, again, it would involve a significant turnaround in what they've shown so far, and I don't think anyone's buying this line that they were foxy against France, because that would mean they've been foxing for 6 weeks, and I don't think that's the case at all. So, there has been gradual progression though. So, if they can take another step against Georgia in a bit over a week, and then they can get things sorted for Wales and Fiji to follow, then, hopefully things take care of themselves, get through a quarterfinal. And again, if they can get to a quarterfinal, that would have meant they've won a few games. And so hopefully there's a bit of confidence, a bit of momentum behind them. And so, semi-final would mark a good tournament. Dream scenario would absolutely be getting through to that. And then it would be an absolutely mouth-watering clash with whoever it could be in the final this stage, and trying to narrow down one out of the likely 4 on the other side is a bit of it's a toss of 4 coins at the moment, isn't it?
All right, well, I'm going to ask you to do that. Just to finish, Brett, when you get up early in the morning, around 6 a.m. on Sunday, October 29, who are you expecting to see playing in the Rugby World Cup final?
Oh, look, I will say, I won't say that I'm expecting it to be Australia. I hope it's Australia, but I won't say that I'm expecting it. I think on current form, it's a little bit hard to go past France and South Africa at the moment. Now, they will meet in a semi-final, which is actually going to make that difficult, isn't it? So, I just think France have got all the planets aligning for them at the moment. They lose Entimac, but they showed on the weekend that they can actually still play some pretty good rugby without them. South Africa have been just phenomenal and getting better and better each week. And that win over the All Blacks at Twickenham last weekend was just a superb display of rugby. So I feel like there's a lot of momentum behind the Box at the moment as well. And on one hand, it is an absolute shame that they would have to play France in the semi-final. So that's where I feel like I'm heading, mate. If it feels like it would be one of France or South Africa, and it does sort of feel like things are aligning for the French at the moment. All right, Brett.
Well, actually, that can happen because those two teams don't meet in a semi. They cross over at the semi-final stage. So a South Africa-France final is absolutely possible. So we'll chalk that up for you, mate. Brett McKay out of Australia. Good to get his views. And finally, to Wales we go. And I do actually, as I'm doing the segment, Simon sent a text, Piney, you need to rename that segment. From contenders, Fiji have more chance than Wales, England and Australia. Simon, I think you might be right, but we'll carry on because Dewi Preece from One News, proud Welshman, avid rugby follower, is with us. I've put you into the contenders for now, Dewi. What are your realistic expectations for Wales at this tournament?
Well, first of all, can I just say I'm delighted that we have been lumped in the contenders category to start with. That's a tick in the box to start with. Look, I think this, even with the head and heart debate, this is a really tough one to try and pick out because it's a bizarre World Cup as it's come to 2023. Because if we were in Pool A or B, I'd have packed my bags already for 2027 in Australia. We are not in the kind of form to beat one of what I would say is the top four teams in this tournament at the moment. But put us in Pool C and D, and there is a very realistic chance. Well, there's a certainty that one of either Wales, Australia, Fiji, England, Argentina, Japan are going to be 80 minutes from a Rugby World Cup final. That's how the draw has panned out. So yes, while the heart is probably creeping into this answer slightly, I do think there's a genuine chance that as long as they can get off to a good start against Fiji, and I don't mean a huge scoreline, I think they just need to put a solid performance up on the board first up, solid set piece, confident combinations in the midfield. I actually think they might be able to get a little bit of a run throughout the group. And then what happens then is you're in a quarter final against the likes of England or Argentina. Neither team would be overly scary. But I think realistically, I don't see the World Cup for Wales going anywhere beyond that. So I think we're more looking at this from a performance perspective rather than results is where my gut is landing. But all I will say is this screams a little bit of 2011. We had a very inexperienced squad then, and we've generally got an inexperienced squad now. So miracles can happen, Piney.
Yeah, well, they can, Dewey. You're right. I mean, as long as you don't get your captain sent off after 7 minutes in the semi-final as happened in 2011, you might have a chance. But, OK, let's go with your heart now then. And the best case scenario for Wales, you've talked there about miracles happening and Wales going deep, and you're talking about semi-finals there. I mean, could Wales make the World Cup final?
Well, let me pull the scarf back down from my ears after you reminded me of that red card against France. But thank you very much for that. In terms of can they make the final, I'll say no. But the only reason I'll say no at the moment, and I'll caveat it in a second, is I don't see us beating one of the top four. And for me, the top four this time round is probably no surprise. It's France and New Zealand, South Africa and Ireland. But strange things can happen. We always see there's at least one or two absolutely rogue results in a Rugby World Cup. And I think this Rugby World Cup, there's going to be one knockout game, which is going to be a very controversial decision. Whether it is a red card or a referee ruling or something is going to happen that will knock a big team out. And why can't Wales, as a springboard from that 2011 result, have a little bit of good karma on this front and be on the receiving end of some sort of miracle to sneak through into a final? So yeah, the heart certainly sees a semi-sensible route to the semi-final. And then you are talking an 80-minute game of rugby. You know, if we're up against the French, who knows? They might be the ones to crumble in front of their home fans. I'm just going to put it out there. So if Wales can capitalise and benefit from certain scenarios going their way elsewhere, then absolutely rock on the final.
Oh, I love it. I love the passion and the optimism. But let's get back to some cool, calm, calculated composure now with the last question. With your journalist hat on, objectively, who do you think plays in the Rugby World Cup final?
So I'm usually a walking contradiction when it comes to trying to hone down to two teams, particularly honing down to one. And I think what I would say is, and I'm going to lean on my formula, which actually succeeded in 2019. But in 2019 in Japan, I thought it was the loser from South Africa, New Zealand's group game that would go on to win the World Cup. The only prediction I got wrong then was I thought it would be the other way around and that New Zealand would lose the opening game. And I actually think there's a very similar scenario going to happen this time around. And I'm honing in again on South Africa and Ireland. I think whoever loses that group game, for me, is going to go through second in that group, and for me are going to take on France in the quarterfinal, because I do see France getting the edge over New Zealand in that opening clash. And I think that kind of springboard from a quarterfinal win against the home nations for Ireland, for me, if I was to go with which way I think it's going, would see a repeat of that early group clash between Ireland and South Africa in the final. And having done the little, the predictor games you can do on a few websites, I've done it a couple of times. And I'm coming out with Ireland, South Africa as my final game. And dare I say, my Celtic cousins, they might be able to dream this time, because if I had a cheeky $10, I think I'm going for the luck of the Irish.
Wow, amazing. Dewi, thank you so much for joining us with a Welsh viewpoint. Dewi Preece there, wrapping our little mini jaunt around some of the contenders. We've been to South Africa, England, Australia and Wales.
For more from Weekend Sport with Jason Pine, listen live to News Talk ZB weekends from midday, or follow the podcast on iHeartRadio.